The morning shift at the Deep Space Monitoring Station started like any other day. Commander Hana poured her coffee and settled into her chair, surrounded by dozens of glowing screens that captured signals from across the galaxy. For 3 years she had been listening to the cosmic silence, hoping to catch even a whisper of alien life. Most days brought nothing but the background hum of distant stars and the occasional burst of radiation from dying suns. But today was different. At exactly 6:47 a.m., her equipment picked up something that made her nearly drop her coffee cup. Beautiful, complex music was flowing through space from a star system thousands of light years away. The melodies were unlike anything she had ever heard, not the chaotic noise of natural phenomena, but organized, intelligent, and hauntingly beautiful. The sounds reminded her of wind chimes mixed with whale songs, but there was something mathematical about the patterns. Each note seemed to connect to the next in ways that suggested meaning, purpose, intelligence. Hana's heart raced as she realized what she might be hearing. After decades of searching, humanity had finally found proof that we weren't alone in the universe. She immediately called Dr. Minho, the station's expert in pattern analysis and theoretical xenolinguistics. When he arrived and heard the recordings, his face went pale. These weren't random alien sounds, they were language. Complex, sophisticated communication that spoke of an advanced civilization trying desperately to reach someone, anyone, who might listen. The beings called themselves the Zephyrian Collective, and their story was terrifying. Through their musical language, they described crystal cities that grew like living things, powered by harmonic frequencies that sustained entire civilizations. Their people looked like walking gemstones, beautiful and peaceful, with bodies made of living crystal that resonated with the energy of their worlds, but something horrible had found them. The Void Swarm, creatures that existed like a disease in space itself, had begun consuming Zephyrian worlds one by one. These weren't ordinary invaders with ships and weapons. The swarm fed on electromagnetic energy, draining the life force, from entire planets until nothing remained but cold, dead rock floating in space. As Minho worked around the clock to decode more of their language, the situation became clearer and more desperate. The Zephyrians had been broadcasting distress calls across the galaxy for months. Their messages contained detailed descriptions of the swarm's attack patterns, warnings about how the creatures spread from system to system, and desperate pleas for military assistance from any civilization capable of helping. What made the situation truly heartbreaking was the response they received: absolute silence. Every major civilization in the galaxy had heard their calls. Advanced species with technology beyond human imagination, vast interstellar empires, ancient races that had existed for millions of years. They had all listened to the Zephyrians' desperate songs and chosen to do nothing. Fear had paralyzed the galaxy. The Void Swarm was too dangerous, too alien, too powerful for anyone to risk confronting. It was easier to hide, to hope the darkness would consume someone else and pass. Then by one, the great civilizations turned away from the dying Zephyrians, leaving them to face extinction completely alone. Hana watched her screens as the music from Zephyrian space began to change. The beautiful harmonies turned sharp and discordant. Panic crept into the alien songs as world after world went silent. Crystal cities that had sung for thousands of years were being drained of their life energy, their inhabitants dying as their harmonic networks collapsed. Elder Thymel was the last great singer of his people, an ancient being who had lived for centuries and knew all the old songs that kept Zephyrian civilization alive. As his homeworld died around him, he made a final, desperate decision. Using the last of his life energy, he created one final transmission that would carry across the galaxy long after his voice fell silent. This wasn't just a goodbye message. Hidden within the complex musical patterns were complete technical specifications for faster-than-light travel, technology that the Zephyrians had perfected over millennia. Thymel was giving away his people's greatest secrets, hoping that someone somewhere might use this knowledge to prevent what had happened to his species from happening to others. Dr. Minho decoded the transmission with tears in his eyes. Old Zephyrian had known his people were doomed. But he still believed that hope existed somewhere in the galaxy. His final gift was a bridge between worlds, a way for distant civilizations to reach each other when darkness threatened to consume them. As the last signals from Zephyrian space faded into static, Commander Hana stared at the quiet screens. An entire civilization had been wiped from existence while the galaxy watched in cowardly silence. But now humanity faced the same choice that had paralyzed every other species. The Void Swarm was still out there, still hungry, still spreading through space toward new victims. The question that would define humanity's future was simple. Would they hide like everyone else? Or would they be the first civilization brave enough to stand against the darkness? Dr. Gina had always been the kind of person who noticed things others missed. While her colleagues at the radio astronomy lab focused on big, obvious signals from pulsars and quasars, she spent her nights listening to the quiet spaces between the stars. She called it cosmic whispers, the faint background noise that most scientists ignored as unimportant static. On a cold Tuesday evening, while reviewing data from the previous week, something caught her attention. Buried deep in what looked like random cosmic background radiation were patterns that seemed almost too organized to be natural. The frequencies rose and fell in waves that reminded her of music, but unlike any music she had ever heard, her team thought she was wasting time. "It's just interference from old satellites," said her supervisor. "Maybe solar wind hitting our equipment," suggested another colleague. But Gina couldn't shake the feeling that she was looking at something important. The patterns were too complex, too mathematical to be random noise. She decided to take the data to her friend Tae-hyun, a linguist who specialized in ancient languages and mathematical patterns in communication. Tae-hyun worked at the university across town, spending his days decoding dead languages and trying to understand how different cultures expressed complex ideas through symbols and sounds. When Gina showed him the frequency patterns converted into visual graphs, Tae-hyun's eyes widened with excitement. "This isn't random," he said, pointing at repeating sequences in the data. "Look here. These patterns follow mathematical rules. They're building on each other like sentences in a language we don't understand." Working together, they began to uncover the truth hidden in the cosmic static. The signals weren't coming from natural phenomena or human technology. They were messages from somewhere deep in space, transmitted by beings who used sound and frequency as their primary form of communication. As weeks passed, Tae-hyun cracked more of the alien language. The messages told a story that chilled them both. An entire civilization was dying, consumed by something they called the Void Swarm. These weren't just distress calls. They were detailed warnings about an enemy that fed on the energy of living worlds. But the most incredible discovery came when they analyzed the final transmission. Hidden within the last desperate message were technical blueprints, complete instructions for building technology that could travel faster than light. The dying aliens had given away their most advanced secrets, hoping someone would use this knowledge to survive what was coming. Gina and Tae-hyun brought their discovery to government officials, expecting immediate action. Instead, they found endless meetings, committees, and debates about impossibilities. Politicians argued about costs, scientists questioned whether the alien technology would even work, and military leaders worried about unknown dangers. "We can't just build spaceships based on alien blueprints," one general said during a classified briefing. "What if it's a trap? What if this technology is designed to harm us? Even if the technology works," added a scientist from NASA, "it would take decades to understand it properly. We're talking about physics that's completely beyond our current knowledge." Month after month, the debates continued while nothing was actually done. Earth's governments were paralyzed by the same fear that had stopped every other civilization in the galaxy from helping the dying Zephyrians. But not everyone was willing to wait for official approval. Engineer Kyung had been following the leaked reports about the alien transmissions, and unlike the politicians, he saw an opportunity rather than an obstacle. He had spent 20 years designing spacecraft for mining companies, building tough, practical vessels that could operate in the harshest conditions. Kyung understood something that the government committees missed. The alien blueprints weren't asking humans to build impossible technology from scratch. The Zephyrians had designed their final gift to work with whatever materials and knowledge the receiving species already possessed. It was like receiving a recipe that could be adapted to whatever ingredients you had available. Working in secret, Kyung began reaching out to others who shared his sense of urgency. He found allies among aerospace engineers who were frustrated with bureaucratic delays, scientists who believed the alien threat was real, and military veterans who understood that sometimes action was more important than perfect planning. They called themselves the Harmony Project, named after the musical nature of the alien transmissions. Meeting in coffee shops and abandoned warehouses, they began planning humanity's first interstellar mission, using resources that officially didn't exist. The breakthrough came when Kyung discovered an abandoned titanium mining facility in northern Canada. The complex had been shut down for 5 years, but its massive industrial equipment was still functional. More importantly, it was isolated, far from government oversight and curious reporters. Over several months, volunteers began arriving at the facility. Retired engineers brought decades of experience, young scientists contributed fresh ideas, and skilled workers donated their time and expertise. They came from different countries, different backgrounds, but they were united by a simple belief: someone had to try. The work was dangerous and exhausting. They were attempting to build technology that human science barely understood, using makeshift equipment in a facility that wasn't designed for spacecraft construction. Every day brought new problems, new failures, new reasons to give up. But they also had something that no government committee possessed: the desperate urgency of knowing that somewhere in space, an unstoppable enemy was consuming worlds and moving closer to Earth. While politicians debated and scientists theorized, the Harmony Project was building humanity's first real chance to fight back against the darkness that had already destroyed one civilization and would soon come looking for others. The day of launch felt like stepping into a nightmare and a dream at the same time. Captain Do-hyun stood in front of the Harmony's Edge, a ship that looked nothing like the sleek spacecraft from movies. Built from salvaged mining equipment and held together with determination, it resembled a floating factory, more than a starship. But hidden within its crude exterior was technology that no human had ever tested, an alien faster-than-light drive that might either carry them across the galaxy or tear them apart in the attempt. 200 volunteers had gathered for this impossible mission. They weren't professional astronauts or trained soldiers. They were ordinary people who had heard about the dying Zephyrians and decided that someone needed to try helping, even if the odds of survival were almost zero. Engineers, doctors, teachers, mechanics, people from every walk of life who shared one thing in common: they couldn't live with themselves if they did nothing. Do-hyun had been a cargo ship captain before this, hauling supplies between Earth and the asteroid mining stations. He understood dangerous journeys and hard choices, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. As he looked at the faces of his crew, he saw fear mixed with determination. They all knew this might be a one-way trip into the unknown depths of space. The launch itself was terrifying. Unlike the smooth acceleration of conventional rockets, the Zephyrian drive created a sensation like falling through reality itself. Space twisted around them in ways that human eyes weren't designed to see. Several crew members became violently sick, while others reported feeling like they were being stretched across impossible distances. But it worked. The alien technology carried them across thousands of light years in just a few months. A journey that should have taken hundreds of thousands of years using human technology. When they finally emerged from faster-than-light travel, they found themselves in a star system that looked like a war zone. Debris floated everywhere, the broken remains of crystal structures that had once been beautiful cities. Dead worlds hung in space like burned-out light bulbs, their surfaces cracked and lifeless. The magnificent Zephyrian civilization that had sent those musical messages to Earth was gone, reduced to scattered refugee ships fleeing through the darkness. The first alien Do-hyun met was nothing like what he had expected. Kithra appeared to be young, though it was hard to tell with a being made of living crystal. Her body was cloudy and dim, lacking the brilliant colors that healthy Zephyrians supposedly possessed. She looked exhausted, defeated, like someone who had watched her entire world die. When she first spoke to the humans, her voice came through their communication systems as haunting musical tones that their computers translated into words. "You came," she said, and there was wonder in her voice. After all the silence, someone actually came. Kethra had never known her people's civilization at its peak. She was born during the war with the Void Swarm, had grown up in refugee camps and fleeing ships. The beautiful crystal cities, the grand harmonies that could make entire worlds sing. These were just stories told by the elders, legends of a golden age she would never see. Through her, the humans learned the terrible truth about their enemy. The Void Swarm wasn't made up of individual creatures that could be fought like normal enemies. They were more like a living electromagnetic storm that consumed the energy that powered advanced civilizations. When they attacked a world, they didn't need weapons or armies. They simply drained the electrical systems that kept modern society running. Every advanced species in the galaxy uses the same basic technology, Kithara explained, her translated voice filled with despair. Quantum computers, energy fields, electromagnetic shields. The swarm feeds on all of it. The more sophisticated your technology, the easier it is for them to drain your power and leave you helpless. This was why no one had been able to fight back effectively. The galaxy's greatest civilizations had become victims of their own advancement. Their powerful energy weapons wouldn't fire, their shields couldn't activate, their ships couldn't move. All because the swarm consumed the very power that made these technologies work. But as Kithara studied the human ship, she began to notice something strange. The Harmony's Edge was primitive by galactic standards, built with crude mechanical systems and simple electrical circuits. Where other species used quantum computers, humans relied on basic processors. Where others used energy fields, humans used physical armor and mechanical joints. "Your technology is so simple," she said, but there was no insult in her voice. Instead, there was growing excitement. "The swarm feeds on complex electromagnetic patterns, but your systems are too basic for them to easily drain. Your weapons use chemical explosives instead of energy beams. Your computers use simple electrical circuits instead of quantum fields." For the first time since the war began, Kithara felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. The humans had arrived just in time, not despite their primitive technology, but because of it. What the rest of the galaxy saw as humanity's weakness might actually be their greatest strength against an enemy that fed on advanced civilizations. The irony wasn't lost on Captain Do-hyun. Humanity had always felt inferior, looking up at the stars and wondering if they would ever be advanced enough to join the galactic community. Now they had discovered that sometimes being the least advanced species in the galaxy was exactly what the situation required. The first battle against the Void Swarm taught humanity a harsh lesson about fighting an enemy unlike anything they had ever imagined. Fleet Commander Sohee watched from the bridge of the Harmony's Edge as her small collection of converted cargo ships and mining vessels faced creatures that moved through space like living shadows, absorbing energy from everything they touched. Traditional military tactics were useless against an enemy that thought as one massive mind. The swarm moved with perfect coordination, anticipating every conventional strategy before human commanders could even give orders. When Sohee tried standard fleet formations, the creatures flowed around them like water. When she attempted coordinated attacks, they scattered and reformed faster than her ships could target them. But Sohee had something that no other military commander in the galaxy possessed: a crew of humans who specialized in chaos. Her fleet wasn't made up of trained naval officers following rigid protocols. Instead, she commanded miners who were used to improvising with broken equipment, engineers who solved problems with whatever materials they had available, and civilians who had never learned that certain things were supposed to be impossible. The breakthrough came during their third engagement with a swarm scout force. While Sohee was planning a careful tactical approach, her weapons officer, a former demolitions expert named Jaewon, ignored protocol entirely. Instead of using their energy weapons in coordinated volleys, he fired everything at random intervals, mixing chemical explosives with kinetic projectiles and even launching empty cargo containers filled with scrap metal. The effect on the swarm: was immediate and unexpected. The creatures, which had moved with perfect unity moments before, suddenly began to stutter and hesitate. Their flawless coordination broke down as they struggled to process the seemingly random chaos of human attacks. They can't predict us, so he realized with growing excitement. Their hive mind works by analyzing patterns and responding perfectly to coordinated strategies. But we're not being coordinated, we're being chaotic, and chaos is something they can't calculate. This discovery changed everything. Instead of trying to fight the swarm with military precision, so he began encouraging her crews to be as unpredictable as possible. Miners used their industrial equipment in ways it was never designed for, turning asteroid drills into weapons and cargo haulers into battering rams. Engineers rigged explosive devices with random timers, creating attacks that even humans couldn't predict. The Zephyrian refugees watched these battles with amazement. For generations, they had been told that the only way to fight the swarm was with perfect harmony and coordinated tactics. Their entire civilization had been built on the principle that order and beauty could overcome any chaos. But here were these primitive humans winning battles by embracing disorder and unpredictability. Kythera worked closely with human engineers to understand their approach to warfare. Where Zephyrian technology relied on perfect crystalline structures that resonated in harmony, human technology was messy, inefficient, and wonderfully unpredictable. A human engine might work differently every time it started. A human weapon might fire with slightly different power levels, and human communications were full of interference and background noise. Inspired by human chaos, Kythera began experimenting with new types of Zephyrian technology. Instead of building perfect crystal networks that sang in flawless harmony, she created hybrid systems that combined crystalline order with human randomness. These new harmonic networks were uglier than traditional Zephyrian technology, but they were also much harder for the swarm to drain or predict. The final battle took place above Zephyr Prime, the dying homeworld where Elder Thymel had sent his last transmission to the galaxy. The planet's surface was covered in cracked crystal cities, their songs silenced by the swarm's feeding. But deep underground, a few survivors still maintained a weak harmonic network that kept their final refuge alive. Pilot Wubin had been a stunt flyer before joining the mission, someone who made his living by doing things with aircraft that safety manuals said were impossible. When Commander Sohee needed someone to lead the final assault on the swarm's main cluster, Wubin volunteered for what everyone knew was likely a suicide mission, flying a modified mining ship loaded with every type of explosive the humans could find. Wubin dove directly into the heart of the swarm formation. But instead of following a planned attack route, he flew like he was performing an airshow, spinning, diving, and changing direction in patterns that defied logic. The swarm creatures, trying to intercept him, became tangled in their own perfect coordination as they struggled to predict his next move. The explosion that followed wasn't just chemical and kinetic. Kythera had equipped Wubin's ship with a hybrid harmonic device that created a burst of ordered chaos, crystalline frequencies mixed with human noise that overloaded the swarm's collective consciousness. For the first time in the war, the Void Swarm's hive mind shattered. Individual creatures suddenly cut off from their collective intelligence fled in confusion. The perfect unity that had made them unstoppable was broken by the beautiful disorder of human unpredictability. In the aftermath of the battle, as Zephyrian, survivors emerged from their underground shelters. Kythera did something that no member of her species had done in generations. She sang a new song, not the perfect ancient harmonies of her ancestors, but an imperfect melody that mixed Zephyrian crystal tones with the chaotic rhythms she had learned from humans. It was a song of hope, friendship, and the discovery that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from blending order with chaos, creating something that neither species could have achieved alone. The news traveled across the galaxy faster than anyone had expected. For the first time in galactic history, someone had actually defeated the Void Swarm in open battle. The creatures that had terrorized entire civilizations, consuming world after world with unstoppable hunger, had been forced to retreat by a species that most galactic powers had never even heard of. The swarm's retreat wasn't orderly or strategic. Their hive mind, shattered by humanity's chaotic assault, left individual creatures scattered and confused across dozens of star systems. Some fled toward the dark edges of the galaxy where few civilizations dared to venture. Others simply disappeared into deep space, their collective intelligence too damaged to coordinate any further attacks. But the real victory wasn't just military. Word of humanity's intervention spread through galactic communication networks like wildfire. For centuries, advanced civilizations had lived in fear of the swarm, watching helplessly as entire species were consumed while feeling too afraid to act. Now suddenly there was proof that the unstoppable enemy could be stopped. Engineer Young-Ho found himself at the center of the galaxy's most ambitious construction project. The surviving Zephyrians wanted to rebuild their civilization, but they no longer wanted to recreate the perfect crystal cities that had made them vulnerable to the swarm. Instead, they asked for Young-Ho's help in designing something completely new, cities that combined the beauty of crystalline architecture with the chaotic adaptability of human engineering. The work was unlike anything Young-Ho had ever attempted. Traditional human construction focused on strength and functionality, while Zephyrian architecture had always emphasized harmony and aesthetic perfection. Creating buildings that were both beautiful and unpredictable required him to think in entirely new ways. The new cities that emerged were breathtaking in their strange beauty. Crystal spires grew alongside metal frameworks, creating structures that sang with harmonic frequencies while remaining flexible enough to change and adapt. Gardens of living crystal were interwoven with human-designed systems that could be modified and repaired by anyone with basic technical knowledge. Most importantly, these hybrid cities were resistant to the swarm's feeding methods. Where pure, crystalline technology had been vulnerable to electromagnetic drain, the new mixed systems created too much noise for the creatures to easily consume. The cities could defend themselves simply by existing, but the reconstruction of Zephyrian worlds was only part of a much larger project. Kythera, working closely with human communication specialists, proposed something that had never been attempted before: a galaxy-wide early warning system that could detect swarm activity and coordinate defensive responses across multiple star systems. The Resonance Defense Network, as it came to be called, was built on principles that neither species could have developed alone. Zephyrian harmonic technology provided the long-range communication capabilities needed to span galactic distances, while human engineering created the redundant, adaptable systems that could function even when partially damaged by swarm attacks. The network's first major test came when automated sensors detected swarm activity near a star system inhabited by the Kalari, a species of peaceful traders who had never developed significant military capabilities. In the old galaxy, the Kalari would have been doomed to face the swarm alone, just as the Zephyrians had been. Instead, the defense network immediately alerted every member civilization. Within hours, ships from a dozen different species were moving toward Kalari space, coordinated by the hybrid human-Zephyrian command system. The response wasn't perfect. Different species had different technologies and communication methods, but it was enough. The scattered swarm creatures, still weakened from their previous defeat, fled rather than face a united galactic response. The most remarkable moment came 6 months after the first battle, when medical staff working in the rebuilt Zephyrian cities discovered something impossible. Deep in the ruins of the old crystal archives, they found a stasis chamber that had somehow survived the swarm's feeding. Inside was Elder Thymel, the ancient Zephyrian who had sent the final transmission that brought humanity across the galaxy. Thymel's awakening was like watching someone emerge from a nightmare into a world transformed. The last thing he remembered was his dying world, the silence of his people's songs and the desperate hope that someone somewhere might receive his final message. Now he found himself in cities that sang with new voices, not just the pure, crystal harmonies of his ancestors, but complex melodies that mixed Zephyrian tones with human sounds. The old Zephyrian wept when he heard Kythera's new songs. They weren't the perfect compositions of the ancient world, but they were alive with possibilities. They spoke of friendship across impossible distances, of hope emerging from despair, and of the discovery that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from voices that were never supposed to sing together. As months passed, other civilizations began to overcome their fear and join the growing alliance. The same species that had ignored Zephyrian pleas for help now sent ships, resources, and personnel to support the defense network. They had learned a hard lesson about the cost of indifference and the power of standing together against darkness. Humanity found itself at the center of a galactic community they had never imagined joining, not as conquerors or superior beings, but as the species that had proven a simple truth. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from being the strongest or the smartest, but from being willing to help when everyone else is too afraid to try. The galaxy was still dangerous. The Void Swarm was wounded but not destroyed, and other threats lurked in the darkness between stars. But for the first time in centuries, civilizations across the galaxy knew they didn't have to face extinction alone.